Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was April 19th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from Joan in the Commune Register, and it is an interesting one because it brings up his relationship with the recipient, the Count of Empúries. All right, I did a little bit of research into the Count of Empúries, and I found out some interesting things. First of all, I think that in previous episodes, I had mentioned the Count of Empúries and just kind of associated him with rebellion, that he's just looking for the chance to break away. But I found out that it's so much more complicated than that, and it involves Sibylla de Fortia, the former queen. So, okay, couple episodes ago, talked about how there's still trouble with Sibylla de Fortia. The big story, kind of taking it all the way back to the beginning of this familial rift, is that Sibylla was a lady in the court of Joan's mother, Queen Eleanor. And when Joan's mother died, very quickly, Père the Ceremonious, Joan's father, announced that he was in a relationship with Sibylla de Fortia. And it was pretty scandalous. It's not like Sibylla de Fortia was a servant, but she was really low status, and actually she was illiterate. And so at the beginning of her time as the girlfriend of the king, she is supplied with reading tutors so that she can learn how to read. And then a little while goes by, and Père the Ceremonious decides he's going to marry her. And this is when Joan has a really big problem, because it's okay for his father to just have a relationship, but once you get married and the woman becomes a queen, then there's a possibility that they will have a male child, and that child will grow up to contest the power of the children of the earlier marriage. So it invites instability in the future. And that's the reason why Joan is against the marriage. And it could also be because Père is meddling with Joan's marriage choices, and so it's kind of like, if you're going to be against my marriage, I'm going to be against your marriage, Dad. So anyway, it's all very messy. All right. That's the big story about Sibylla de Fortia, but it turns out that Sibylla de Fortia has made other enemies. And there's one particular noble that has really been against Sibylla de Fortia. And that person is Bernat Almeny d'Oriols, who is some kind of lord in the Pyrenees region, and basically is some kind of relative of Sibylla de Fortia, and they are really close in alliance. Okay, so I think I might have just missaid something. Okay, Sibylla and Bernat Alemany Doriols, they're relatives. They are close and allied. Now, here's where the Count of Empúries comes into the picture. The Count of Empúries, who, just to make things nice and confusing, is also named Joan. The Count of Empúries, he somehow develops an antagonistic relationship with this person in the Pyrenees that is a close ally of Sibylla. And so in that context, he decides he's going to try to break away from the Crown of Aragon. And this is before the reign of Joan. This is in 1381. So this is right after Joan and Violante get married. Joan is the Duke of Girona. His father, Pere the Ceremonious, is old but going strong. And so when the Count of Empúries decides to break away, Pere the Ceremonious is like, oh no you don't. I am an old and grizzled monarch and no one messes with me. Because this is like after all of these different wars that Pere the Ceremonious, mostly wins. So, it's gutsy to try to break away at this moment when the reign of the king is like really strong. But the Count of Empúries is like maybe using this as an excuse. Like maybe he's wanted to break away from the Crown of Aragon for a while. And this kind of falling out with a close relative or a buddy of Queen Sibylla is like his excuse. So he has a rebellion, and it's pretty bloody. And in the end, the rebellion is defeated. But Joan, the Count of Empúries, is allowed to remain in power and basically just has to accept that he is going to just have to stay a vassal to the King of the Crown of Aragon. But guess what? There's kind of a wrinkle in all this, which is that there's someone else who really doesn't like Sibylla de Fortia. Well, it's Joan, the heir, the Duke of Girona. And so it really seems from the history here that the Count of Empúries had made a deal with the Duke of Girona, saying, hey, fellow Joan, Duke of Girona, when you become king, how about you just let me have my own separate kingdom? And because they both really hate Sibylla, Joan, Duke of Girona, and maybe Joan just doesn't really care too much. He's like, fine, the Empúries can be its own thing. Doesn't bother me. Not quite sure. But anyway, they kind of have this understanding. Because as soon as Joan inherits the throne, within a couple months, it's in February, Joan grants the Count of Empúries independence. Basically says, all right, you can break away. And so that is what's going on in the lead up to this document. That the two Joans are buddies, that they both really don't like Sibylla, that there was a rebellion, and now Joan has basically changed the entire policy of the Crown of Aragon to allow for the Count of Empúries to have his own realm and do his own thing. One other piece of this that just kind of adds to the emotional resonance of this business here is that Joan's sister, possibly stepsister, whose name was Joanna, had married Joan, the Count of Empúries. And she, Joanna, had gone to her father, Pere the Ceremonious, during the time of the rebellion in the 1380s, and had asked him to try to reconcile with her husband, his son-in-law. And look, oh gosh, what he did is that in front of everybody, in the middle of the court, he slapped her across the face. And that was the last time those two ever saw each other. And in fact, Joanna, after that, I'm a little shaky on, but I've got one source, and it's, okay, let's just be honest, it's Wikipedia. The Wikipedia article says she died right after. I'm not quite sure about that because I feel like I read something else that did not say that, but for now we're just going to leave it because it amps up the drama. But if we're going to be like really serious about this later, we have to check on that in some kind of academic source. Okay, so that just kind of adds to the like emotional intensity of all this. Here we are in April. It's about 2 months after Joan officially gave the Count of Empúries sovereignty over his land. And just by the way, where is this land? It is up along the coast, kind of north of Catalonia. And so it's coastal piece of land. And this document from April 19th today, it's all about this troublesome little report that Joan has received. He tells the Count of Empúries, you know what? I have gotten some information that in 2 of your coastal ports, well, I guess all the ports would be coastal, 2 of your ports, one called Roses and another called Cadaqués. Cadaqués? Oh gosh, I don't even know how to say that one. But in 2 of these ports, we know that there are some ships, and they're pirate ships. And they are getting ready to do some piracy. And they're gonna plunder some of the ships that are gonna, be sailing out of Barcelona or something like that. They're gonna cause damage to our interests. So do something about it. That's what this letter is saying. It's very, frustrated. Because, dude, you're my buddy. And I let you have your own realm. And now you're not stopping pirates from loading up and gearing up to attack some of my merchant ships? Come on. What kind of friendship loyalty is that? So this document is in Latin, and it's really hard to tell if there's any kind of anger tones in it, because Latin translation is so much more difficult than Catalan translation for me, especially to detect any kind of tone. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is some kind of tone in this letter saying, come on, fellow Joan, what are you doing here? All right, so an interesting document, and one that I think hits at the way that these past relationships can have implications for future disputes. And I just want to note that the previous time that we talked about Empúries on the podcast was toward the very beginning on January 6th, and it's like the first day of the reign of Joan and Violante. And remember, Joan is like out of commission, and so it's Violante who's kind of running things. And she writes this letter to Joan about, I guess, like the urgent things at the very beginning of their reign. And what is at the top of the list but this concern about the Count of Empúries and whether he would cause any trouble. But, of course, it's possible that Violante didn't know about how buddy-buddy the two Joans were. Or maybe Joan hadn't really decided in the early days or in the sort of months leading up to his ascension to the throne. He hadn't really decided whether he was going to actually let the Count of Empúries break away. But by the time we get to February 20th, that had transpired. And so Joan basically just kind of let it go and let the Count of Empúries have his sovereignty. It's hard to tell exactly how Violante fit in to all that decision-making. But what we do know is that we've got that letter on January 6th that Claire Ponsic has analyzed in a close reading in her article about Violante's authoritative voice. So it is interesting to see how all these months later we have this problem cropping up between the two Joans, this problem regarding pirates. Hopefully, we'll get to see another document about what has happened, but for the king's sake, Joan's, hopefully Joan, the Duke of Empúries, put a stop to this hospitality for pirates. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.